The last Apache woman was sold, until a quiet rancher bought her and set her free. The sun was just beginning to rise over the vast, dry lands of the desert, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The air was hot and dry, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. In the quiet early morning, the desert seemed peaceful, almost timeless, but in one corner of this harsh landscape, a storm was about to change someone's life forever. A young Apache woman whose name had been whispered softly in her village as a symbol of strength and courage, walked carefully along a narrow canyon trail. Her steps were light, practiced, and careful. She knew these lands like the back of her hand. The desert had been her home since birth, and every rock, every cactus, every ripple of sand held a memory. She had grown up listening to the stories of her ancestors, stories of bravery, survival, and freedom. She carried those stories in her heart, and they were as much a part of her as the wind that swept across the plains. But that morning, she was not alone. From the ridge above, hidden behind the jagged rocks, a small group of armed men watched her carefully. Their eyes were sharp, calculating, and cold. These were men who did not care for stories or freedom. To them, the desert was a place of opportunity, a place where lives could be taken, bought, or sold. And today, their target was her. She moved swiftly, but the men were faster. A sudden shout broke the silence of the canyon, startling birds from the sparse trees. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the safety of her familiar trails had been breached. She turned, her dark eyes wide with fear and determination. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her bare feet kicking up clouds of red dust. She could hear the men behind her, their voices harsh and commanding, urging her to stop. But she could not. She could not stop, not now, not ever. Freedom ran through her veins like fire, and she refused to be taken without a fight. She dodged through the rocks, leapt over fallen branches, and twisted through narrow paths where she hoped the men could not follow. Her mind raced with memories of her family, her people, and the life she had lived. Every thought gave her strength. Yet, despite her agility and knowledge of the land, the men were relentless. They were trained, organized, and they had weapons that could reach farther than her hands could throw stones. As the sun climbed higher, the desert grew hotter, and the woman's strength began to wane. Sweat stung her eyes and her chest burned with exhaustion, but she refused to surrender. Eventually, she found herself cornered near a steep cliffside. There was nowhere left to run. The men closed in slowly, their shadows stretching long in the bright morning sun. She stopped and faced them, standing tall despite her fatigue. Her hands were empty, but her spirit was unbroken. She stared into their eyes with defiance, hoping, somehow, to show them that she could not be tamed so easily. The leader of the group, a man with a weathered face and a cruel smile, stepped forward. He had been through many such captures and had little patience for resistance. "You will come with us," he said, his voice firm, but there was a hint of amusement at her stubbornness. "It is better to give up now than to make things harder for yourself." The woman shook her head, her long dark hair whipping in the wind. "I will never be yours," she said, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her stomach. She knew her words could not stop them, but it mattered to speak them, to declare that she was not just a prize or a possession. But the men did not listen. One grabbed her roughly by the arm, and another moved to hold her shoulders. They were strong, and after a brief struggle she was overpowered. Her heart sank as she realized the inevitable. She had fought with all her strength, but this was a fight she could not win. They bound her hands behind her back with coarse rope and blindfolded her. The desert, which had been her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. She could hear the men talking among themselves, laughing and planning the next steps of her capture. They spoke of towns, auctions, and buyers, reducing her life to an object of trade. The words stung more than any blow could, but she forced herself to stay silent. She had to remain strong, at least in her mind. As they led her away, the woman tried to remember everything about her home. the smell of the morning dew on the desert plants, the sound of the river nearby, the laughter of children playing in the sand. Each memory became a shield, a reminder of the life that existed beyond this moment. She closed her eyes, imagining herself back among her people, free and unafraid. It gave her courage, even as the men continued to march her further from everything she knew. By midday, they reached a small, dusty settlement on the edge of the desert. The town was bustling with people buying and selling goods, animals, and occasionally, people like her. She was brought into a dimly lit room with other captives, where the air smelled of sweat, dust, and fear. She could hear whispers around her, soft murmurs of those who had been captured before, sharing stories of despair and hope in the same breath. The woman's mind raced. She thought of ways to escape, but the men guarding the room were alert and armed. She realized that for now she could only wait and observe. Every detail mattered: the layout of the room, the routines of the guards, the timing of their meals. She promised herself that she would not forget these details, that she would use them if another chance came. Outside the room, she could hear the sounds of the town. Merchants called out their wares, children ran laughing through the streets, and the wind carried the faint scent of cooking fires. Life continued around her, indifferent to her suffering. The contrast made her heart ache, but it also strengthened her resolve. She would survive. She had to. As the day wore on, the captors began preparing for the auction. Tables were set, buyers arrived, and the woman was moved again, this time into a larger room where she would be displayed. She walked silently, head held high, refusing to show the fear and despair she felt inside. Her eyes met those of the townspeople as they examined her, some curious, some indifferent, some cruel. She could feel their gaze, but she would not let it break her. Even as she was treated as property, she clung to the belief that freedom was still possible. Somewhere beyond this town, beyond these men, there was a life waiting for her, a life where she could walk without fear, speak without trembling, and live with dignity. She held on to that thought like a lifeline, knowing that no chains, no ropes, and no cruel hands could take away the strength of her spirit. By evening, the preparations for the auction were nearly complete. The room was filled with a tense energy, a mixture of greed, curiosity, and anticipation. The woman was made to sit quietly, waiting for the event that would determine her fate. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, focusing on her memories of home, of the desert, and of the people she loved. She reminded herself that even if today she was taken, tomorrow could bring a new chance, a new hope, and perhaps even rescue. In the quiet moments before the auction began, the woman allowed herself a small, private act of defiance. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and stared straight ahead, refusing to be reduced to an object. Her mind whispered the words her ancestors had taught her: "No matter what happens, your spirit remains free." Those words were more powerful than any rope, stronger than any weapon, and they carried her through the long hours of waiting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty town, the woman understood one truth clearly: her life was about to change forever. She did not know how, or when, or by whose hands, but she knew that even in captivity, she could not be truly broken. Her heart remained wild and untamed like the desert itself, and that spirit could not be bought, sold, or chained. The auction would begin at dawn the next day. She was terrified, but she was not defeated. And in that fear there was also a spark of hope, a small flame that refused to die. It was the hope that perhaps, somewhere out there, someone would see her not as property, but as a human being deserving of freedom. And so, as night fell over the desert town, the last Apache woman closed her eyes once more, dreaming of the desert, her people, and the freedom that she still believed could be hers. The ropes around her wrists were real, but they could not reach her spirit. That spirit, untamed and resilient, would carry her through whatever came next. The morning sun rose slowly over the dusty town, casting golden light across the narrow streets and worn wooden buildings. A quiet tension filled the air. Today was the day of the auction, and the small town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the event that would draw people from far and wide. Merchants packed their goods, traders sharpened their voices, and townspeople whispered to each other about the rare prize that would soon be presented. Inside a dimly lit room at the center of the town, the Apache woman sat quietly on a rough wooden bench. Her hands were still tied, though the ropes no longer caused her much pain. Pain was a part of life now, as was fear, but she refused to let either control her. Her dark eyes, deep and alert, scanned the room as she tried to memorize every detail. She studied the patterns of the floorboards, the positions of the guards, and the layout of the doors and windows. Every small detail might become important if she ever found a way to escape. Her thoughts, however, were not only on escape. Memories of her home and family pressed into her mind like a soft whisper. She remembered the laughter of children playing near the river, the warmth of the sun on her people's land, the songs her mother had sung at night. These memories were both comforting and painful, reminding her of the life that had been taken away, but also of the life she still hoped to reclaim. The auction room slowly filled with people. Men and women of different ages and backgrounds entered, their shoes stirring up clouds of dust. Some were curious, others were greedy. There were traders looking to make a profit, families seeking something unusual, and a few who simply enjoyed watching the excitement of the crowd. The Apache woman felt their eyes on her, measuring her as if she were an object on display. The feeling was strange and humiliating, but she did not allow it to break her. She held her head high, meeting their gaze with calm defiance. Outside, the noise of the town added to the strange energy of the morning. Children ran past with bundles of firewood, merchants shouted prices, and horses stamped their feet in impatience. The desert sun climbed higher, and the air grew warm and heavy. Inside the room, the smell of sweat, dust, and anticipation was almost suffocating. Every small sound, the shuffle of feet, the murmur of voices made her heart race. She tried to focus on her breathing, reminding herself that panic would help no one. Finally, the auctioneer arrived. A tall man with a loud voice and sharp eyes, he commanded the attention of the crowd immediately. He stood on a small wooden platform at the front of the room, clearing his throat before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing across the room, "today we have a very rare opportunity. One of the last of her people, strong and young, skilled in ways that few understand, is now available. You will not find another like her." The words stung. They were meant to make her seem like a prize, a commodity, rather than a human being. The Apache woman did not flinch. She sat silently, letting the words wash over her, keeping her mind focused on what she knew. Freedom was still possible, even in a place like this. The auctioneer continued, describing her as if she were a rare object in a collection. He spoke of her strength, her knowledge of the land, her skills in survival, and even her beauty. Every word was calculated to excite the crowd and drive the price higher. He gestured toward her, and she could feel the eyes of the townspeople measuring her again. As the bidding began, the atmosphere grew tense. Hands shot up, voices called out numbers, and the price climbed quickly. The Apache woman listened quietly, keeping her expression calm. Some of the bids were enormous, clearly meant to impress others rather than reflect any care for her well-being. She could see the excitement in the eyes of those who were bidding, and it made her heart ache. These people were not thinking about her as a person, they were thinking of themselves. Amid the rising bids, one figure remained quiet. A man dressed in simple clothing with a dusty hat pulled low over his forehead entered the room. He was different from the others. He did not shout, gesture wildly, or laugh at the spectacle. He moved slowly and deliberately, observing the crowd and the woman. There was a calmness about him, a quiet strength that made the bustling room feel slightly slower, almost peaceful. The auctioneer noticed him and called out, "Are you here to bid, sir?" The quiet man nodded, raising a hand slowly. He made a bid that surprised many, not the highest, not aggressive, but firm enough to command attention. The room fell into a brief silence. People whispered to each other, questioning the modest bid, assuming the man did not know what he was doing. The Apache woman noticed him immediately. There was something different in the way he looked at her, not like the others, who measured her as a prize, but with a careful respect, as if he recognized her humanity. Her heart skipped a beat, and for the first time since being captured, a small spark of hope flickered inside her. Could this quiet stranger be different? Could he actually see her as a person rather than an object? Bidding continued. Some people tried to raise the price, shouting numbers quickly to intimidate others. The room grew noisy again, but the quiet man remained calm, raising his bids only when necessary. With each round, it became clear that he was determined but not reckless. The crowd watched, confused and intrigued by his strange approach. Meanwhile, the woman kept her eyes on him, trying to read his intentions, searching for some clue about what he might do next. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. The excitement, the shouting, the clanging of coins, and the murmur of voices filled the room, but the woman's mind was focused. She remembered every detail she had observed earlier, the guards, the doors, the patterns of movement. She noticed that the quiet man did not seem to be here for profit or amusement. He did not whisper to anyone, did not smile at the crowd, and did not treat her as property. There was something in his presence that gave her courage. Finally, after long moments of tense bidding, the auctioneer called out, "Sold!" The quiet man had won. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some were disappointed, others curious, but most seemed indifferent. They had expected a flamboyant, greedy buyer, not a calm, quiet man who simply wanted to claim what he had purchased. The Apache woman was led forward, her hands still bound, as the quiet man approached. He did not shout or laugh. Instead, he extended a hand, careful and steady. "You are free to come with me," he said softly. His words were not loud, but they carried a strange weight, a promise of something better. For a moment, the woman froze. She had heard the word free before, but it had always been meaningless, used by those who wanted to trick her or control her. She looked into the quiet man's eyes, searching for deception, for cruelty, for a sign that he would treat her like the others. But all she saw was honesty and a calm determination to do the right thing. Slowly, she nodded. It felt strange to obey, to trust someone after everything that had happened. Yet something in her heart whispered that this man was different. She allowed herself to follow him, stepping carefully, still alert but feeling a small sense of relief. The ropes around her wrists felt heavy, but the hope of freedom made them easier to bear. As they left the room, she glanced back at the crowd. People were still whispering, still watching, still measuring her as if she were a curiosity. But she no longer cared. Her attention was on the quiet man and the path ahead. Every step took her further from the auction, further from the fear and humiliation she had endured, and closer to something she had not felt in a long time, the possibility of a life in which she could make her own choices. Outside, the town was noisy and chaotic, but the quiet man moved with ease. He guided her gently through the streets, careful to avoid drawing too much attention. For the first time in days, she could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin without it burning her with fear. She could hear the wind moving through the trees and the distant sound of horses. It was a small taste of freedom, but it was real, and it filled her with a sense of hope she had almost forgotten. The ride away from the town was slow, but safe. The quiet man never rushed, never forced, and never spoke harshly. He offered water and food, and when she hesitated to eat, he waited patiently. He did not ask her to explain herself or justify her feelings. Instead, he simply allowed her to exist as a human being, worthy of respect and care. For the first time since being captured, the Apache woman allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the ropes and the auction. She imagined a place where she could walk freely, where no one could force her to be someone she was not, where her spirit could soar as it once had in the desert. And though the road ahead was uncertain and though danger might still exist, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, the quiet, steady pulse of hope. The auction was over, but a new chapter was beginning. And for the last Apache woman, the journey toward freedom had finally begun. The quiet man guided the Apache woman out of the bustling town, leaving behind the dust, noise, and stares that had made her feel like an object. The road ahead stretched through the open plains and rolling hills, lined with scattered trees and the soft whisper of tall grass swaying in the wind. The sun was climbing steadily in the sky, warming the earth and bringing a gentle sense of life to the landscape. The woman, though still weary and exhausted, felt a small spark of hope flicker inside her chest. For the first time in days, she felt that she might be heading toward something more than captivity, toward freedom. The man, who owned the ranch that lay some distance from the town, rode slowly, careful not to tire the woman further. He had chosen a quiet pace, giving her time to adjust to this new reality. She noticed the care in his movements, the way he handled the reins of his horse gently, the way he kept an eye on her without making her feel scrutinized. He had a calmness about him, a presence that seemed to absorb the tension of the world rather than add to it. Though she did not speak immediately, the woman observed him carefully. She had learned long ago to read people by their actions rather than their words, and what she saw in him gave her a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. He did not carry himself like the men who had captured her. He did not see her as a prize to be won or a curiosity to be displayed. Instead, there was a quiet determination in his eyes, a commitment to something she could not yet name, but that felt genuine. The ride was long, and the sun climbed high into the sky, bringing warmth and light to the plains. Along the way, the man offered her water, and she accepted cautiously, remembering how quickly trust could be broken. She sipped slowly, the cool water refreshing her parched throat and weary body. She noticed that he did not press her with questions, did not demand answers or explanations. He simply provided what she needed and allowed her to exist in her own space. That small kindness felt extraordinary after the harshness she had endured. As the day went on, the landscape began to change. The dry, open plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with trees, and in the distance, she could see the outline of a ranch. A small, sturdy house sat among the fields, surrounded by barns, fences, and grazing animals. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, promising warmth and safety. She had never imagined a place like this could exist, a quiet sanctuary far from the chaos of towns, auctions, and captivity. When they arrived at the ranch, the man dismounted slowly and offered his hand to help her from the horse. She hesitated for a moment, then took it, feeling the strength and steadiness in his grip. He led her to the porch of the house, where the wooden boards creaked softly under their feet. Inside, the air was cool and clean, a welcome contrast to the dust and sweat of the town. The smell of fresh bread and firewood filled the space, comforting and familiar in a way she could not explain. The man finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "You are safe here," he said. "I do not intend to harm you. You will have food, water, and a place to rest. You are free to stay as long as you need, or leave when you wish. No one here will force you to do anything you do not want." The Apache woman felt a mixture of disbelief and cautious relief. The words sounded almost too good to be true. She had spent so long being controlled by others that the idea of freedom, real freedom, was almost foreign. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had been planted deep in her heart made her hesitate. Still, she could feel the sincerity in his eyes, the patience in his tone, and slowly she began to relax. In the days that followed, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. The woman learned to navigate the space, moving carefully at first, then with more confidence. She helped with small tasks when she felt able, feeding the animals, carrying water, and tending to simple chores. The man never pushed her beyond her comfort, never demanded obedience. He treated her with respect, as a person with her own choices and abilities. As she grew accustomed to the routine, the woman began to notice small details about the rancher that filled her with curiosity and respect. He worked tirelessly but without anger or harshness. He spoke quietly to the animals, checking on them with care. He moved through the land as if he belonged, but not in a way that forced others out of place. And whenever she looked at him, she felt a sense of steadiness, as though he carried the calm of the land itself in his presence. Slowly, a fragile trust began to form between them. The woman began to speak, at first in short, cautious sentences, sharing small details about herself, her experiences, her memories of home, her skills. The rancher listened without interruption, without judgment, and when he spoke, his words were measured and kind. He never dismissed her, never questioned her stories, and never treated her like a child. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen as a human being, not as property or a spectacle. Evenings on the ranch were quiet and peaceful. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with oranges, pinks, and purples. The woman would sit outside, watching the shadows stretch across the fields, listening to the gentle sounds of the animals settling for the night. The rancher often joined her, sitting at a respectful distance, speaking softly about the land, the animals, and the routines of life. Sometimes they did not speak at all, simply sharing the calm of the moment. It was a type of companionship she had never experienced before, one built on respect rather than control. As days turned into weeks, the woman began to open up further. She shared stories of her people, teaching the rancher about her traditions, survival skills, and the ways of the land she had grown up on. She showed him how to track animals, recognize signs in the sky and the land, and find water in hidden places. In return, he shared knowledge of the ranch, of planting crops, tending animals, and living with the land in a different way. Their bond grew slowly, quietly, built on trust and shared experiences rather than words alone. Yet, even as she began to feel a sense of safety, the woman did not forget the dangers that had brought her here. She remained cautious, always aware of her surroundings, and she often thought about the people in the town who had seen her as property. There was a small fear that they might come looking for her, that her freedom could be threatened at any moment. But the rancher's steady presence and careful planning gave her confidence that, for now, she was safe. The woman's strength and resilience became clear to the rancher, who admired not only her skills but her courage. He never pressured her to do anything, but he encouraged her to regain control of her life, to make her own choices, and to embrace the freedom that had been denied to her for so long. Slowly, she began to reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under fear and trauma. She walked taller, spoke more confidently, and allowed herself small joys, watching the sunrise, tending to the animals, and even laughing quietly at moments of unexpected humor. Despite the growing trust, the woman's past was never far from her mind. Nights were sometimes difficult, filled with memories of captivity, fear, and loss. But each time fear threatened to overwhelm her, she reminded herself of the quiet man who had saved her, of the safety and kindness she now experienced, and of the freedom she could finally begin to claim. The rancher never forced her to speak about her past, but when she chose to share, he listened with patience and understanding. As the days passed, a subtle, unspoken bond developed between them. It was not friendship in the ordinary sense, nor was it anything romantic. It was a connection built on trust, respect, and the shared understanding of survival and humanity. The woman began to feel that she could face the future, uncertain though it might be, because she had someone who would not see her as less than human. One afternoon, as they walked along a ridge overlooking the fields, the woman paused to watch a herd of deer moving gracefully across the distance. The rancher stood beside her silently, letting her enjoy the moment. She felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. For the first time since her capture, she could imagine a life not defined by fear or ownership, but by choice and freedom. It was in these quiet, shared moments that the woman began to truly understand the meaning of freedom. It was not only the absence of chains or ropes, it was the presence of safety, respect, and the ability to make one's own decisions. It was the knowledge that she could choose her path, speak her mind, and live without fear of being controlled. And for the first time, she began to believe that such a life was possible, not just in her imagination, but in reality. The days on the ranch passed in a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet reflection. The woman grew stronger, more confident, and more at ease with herself. She learned that freedom was not something given once and forever. It was something nurtured, protected, and cherished every day. And in the rancher, she had found a guardian of that freedom, someone who respected her spirit and her choices. By the end of her first month at the ranch, the woman no longer felt like a captive, though her past lingered in memory. She had begun to reclaim her life, to rebuild her spirit, and to dream of a future in which she could live freely. And though she did not know what the future held, she knew one truth clearly. She was no longer alone, and for the first time in years, she felt the quiet, steady heartbeat of hope. Life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm as the days passed. The Apache woman found herself waking each morning to the soft light of dawn spilling across the fields, the air filled with the gentle sounds of animals stirring. Chickens clucked as they searched for food, horses neighed softly in the paddocks, and cows shuffled through the grass. The quiet man, the rancher who had saved her, moved among them with ease and care. Every day he worked the land and tended the animals, showing patience and attention to detail that the woman had never seen in others before. At first, she had been cautious, moving slowly and observing everything. But as she spent more time on the ranch, she began to take part in the daily routines. She carried water to the animals, helped feed them, and learned how to mend fences and clean the barns. Every task, no matter how small, gave her a sense of purpose and independence she had not felt in a long time. Each morning, as she worked alongside the rancher, she noticed the gentle way he treated her. He never gave orders harshly, never criticized her when she struggled, and never assumed she could not do something on her own. The woman began to see that freedom was more than just leaving the auction and the town behind. Freedom was about being able to make choices, to take action, and to learn without fear. On the ranch, she could decide which chores to do, when to rest, and when to ask for help. The rancher never forced her into anything, and that was a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. She remembered how the men in the town had treated her, and she understood just how precious this respect and autonomy were. One afternoon, the woman and the rancher sat quietly near the edge of the fields, watching the sun lower in the sky. The orange and pink colors of sunset reflected in the river nearby, and the distant mountains looked like dark, gentle shadows against the sky. The woman spoke softly, telling him about her people and her home, the desert land she had grown up in, and the lessons her family had taught her about survival, respect, and courage. She described how the elders had taught her to recognize the signs of the land, the tracks of animals, the direction of the wind, and where to find hidden water sources. The rancher listened carefully, never interrupting, never questioning, and never dismissing her stories. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "You have knowledge that is rare and valuable. It is a gift to know the land the way you do." His words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time in a long time, the woman felt that her skills and her heritage were appreciated, not judged or exploited. It was a moment that strengthened her trust in him and reminded her why she had begun to feel safe on the ranch. As the days passed, the woman began to teach him more about her ways. She showed him how to track animals through the brush, how to find water in hidden places, and how to move quietly and carefully through the land. In return, he shared the knowledge of the ranch, how to care for livestock, repair fences, and plant crops to feed themselves. Each lesson was shared with patience and respect, and slowly, a bond of mutual learning and admiration developed between them. Despite the growing safety and trust, the woman's past was never far from her mind. She sometimes woke in the middle of the night with dreams of the auction, the ropes, and the fearful faces of the men who had captured her. These dreams left her tense and restless, but she learned to ground herself in the safety of the ranch. She reminded herself that she was free now, that no one here would harm her, and that she had choices. With each passing day, the nightmares became less frightening, and she began to heal in ways she had not thought possible. The rancher was aware of her struggles. He never pushed her to talk about them, but he was patient and observant. If she seemed upset, he offered a gentle presence, a quiet hand, or simply gave her space to calm herself. He understood that healing could not be rushed. Slowly, she began to open up about her fears and experiences, speaking when she was ready, knowing that he would listen without judgment. His patience and understanding became a form of protection, as powerful as any fence or lock. Over time, the woman found joy in simple things she had forgotten. She laughed quietly as a young foal stumbled over its own legs. She enjoyed the smell of bread baking in the kitchen, and she felt the warmth of the sun on her skin as she worked in the fields. These moments, small as they were, became treasures, reminders that life could hold beauty even after hardship. The rancher never rushed these moments. He shared them, respected them, and allowed her to feel happiness on her own terms. One morning, while walking along a trail through the hills, the woman stopped to point out the tracks of a deer. "See here," she said softly, crouching down to trace the marks with her fingers. "These tracks tell us it passed through just last night. There is water nearby because it needed to drink." The rancher knelt beside her, watching her hands and listening to her explanations. "You notice everything," he said quietly. "I could never see these things if you didn't teach me." She smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and surprise. She realized that her skills, once ignored or dismissed by others, were now respected and valued. That recognition added to the growing strength of her spirit. Life on the ranch was not without challenges. Sometimes animals became sick or injured, fences broke, or storms swept through the land. These challenges tested both of them, but they faced them together. The woman began to feel capable, realizing that she had survived much worse and could handle the tasks required here. And the rancher, though quiet, showed his admiration for her resilience through his support and calm presence. As the seasons changed, the woman began to understand the meaning of true freedom. It was not only the absence of chains, ropes, or captivity. It was the ability to choose, to learn, to grow, and to heal. She could decide how to spend her days, how to use her skills, and how to interact with the world. She could feel, think, and act without fear. And she was learning that true freedom was also about trust, trust in herself and trust in those who respected her. The rancher, through his actions and quiet consistency, had shown her that freedom could exist in a world that had once been cruel. He had not rescued her with grand gestures or loud promises. He had simply treated her as a human being, giving her the space and respect she deserved. In doing so, he had helped her to rediscover the strength that had always been inside her, waiting to emerge. One evening, after a long day of work, the woman sat outside on the porch, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. The sky was painted with shades of gold, orange, and purple, and the fields shimmered in the fading light. The rancher joined her, sitting quietly without speaking, sharing the peace of the moment. The woman felt a calm she had not known in years. She realized that this life, simple as it might seem, was full of meaning, safety, and hope. In these quiet moments, she began to dream of a future beyond the ranch. She thought of her people, her home, and the life she might reclaim one day. She knew the journey would not be easy, and she did not yet know how or when she would leave, but she also understood that she had the strength, skills, and guidance to face whatever came next. The rancher had given her not only shelter but also the tools to rebuild her life and to make her own choices. The woman's bond with the rancher deepened over time, though it remained a quiet, unspoken connection. It was built on trust, respect, and shared experience. There were no words for the gratitude, admiration, and understanding she felt for him, yet it was clear in the way they worked together, learned from each other, and shared the land. The connection was steady and strong, a foundation for the healing and freedom she was beginning to embrace. By the end of her months on the ranch, the woman had changed in ways she had never imagined possible. Her body was strong, her mind sharp, and her heart open to hope again. She walked with confidence, spoke with clarity, and acted with the knowledge that her choices mattered. The rancher's guidance and respect had allowed her to reclaim her life piece by piece, teaching her that freedom was not a gift to be given, but a state of being to be nurtured. And so, life continued on the ranch, simple but full of meaning. The Apache woman had found safety, trust, and the quiet strength to heal. She had begun to understand the true meaning of freedom, not as the absence of chains, but as the presence of choice, respect, and dignity. The rancher, through his quiet actions and patience, had helped her rediscover a life she thought she had lost forever. And as the sun set each evening, painting the sky with colors of hope and possibility, the woman felt a small, steady flame of joy and confidence growing inside her, one that could never again be extinguished. The days on the ranch had grown long and steady, filled with work, learning, and quiet companionship. The Apache woman had grown stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own power. She had learned to trust again, to rely on her instincts, and to use the skills that had kept her alive for so long. Yet, even in this safe and nurturing place, she could not forget that her life was meant to be lived freely, on her own terms. The ranch was a sanctuary, but it was not her final destination. The quiet rancher had become a guide, protector, and friend. He never demanded more than she could give, never forced her into anything, and always respected her decisions. Through his patient actions, he had shown her that freedom was more than escaping captivity. It was the ability to make choices, to feel safe, and to reclaim one's dignity. His quiet presence had given her a sense of stability, but he had also encouraged her to imagine a future beyond the ranch. One morning, as the sun rose over the rolling hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the woman stood at the edge of the fields and looked out toward the distant mountains. She felt a stirring in her heart, a mixture of excitement, fear, and determination. She had begun to consider what life might be like beyond the ranch, to think about the lands of her ancestors, and to wonder if she could find her people or their descendants. The dream of returning to her roots was becoming stronger with each passing day. The rancher approached quietly, holding a bucket of water for the animals. He noticed the thoughtful expression on her face and asked softly, "You've been quiet this morning. What's on your mind?" She looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, "I've been thinking about my people. About where I came from. I want to see the lands of my ancestors. I want to find out if anyone is left who remembers our stories." The rancher nodded, understanding her longing without hesitation. "Then you should go," he said simply. "This ranch has given you safety and strength. Now it's time for you to make your own path. I will help you prepare, and when the day comes, I will send you off with what you need." His words were steady, but she could feel the warmth and respect behind them. He was giving her something more important than food or shelter. He was giving her the freedom to choose her own future. Over the next few weeks, the rancher helped the woman prepare for her journey. They gathered supplies, food, water, maps, and tools, carefully considering what she might need. He taught her strategies for navigating the land, for finding water, and for staying safe in remote areas. She listened and learned eagerly, her confidence growing with every lesson. For the first time in her life, she felt fully equipped to make decisions on her own, knowing she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. During this time, the woman also reflected deeply on her experiences. She thought about the auction, the fear and humiliation she had endured, and the long, uncertain journey that had brought her to the ranch. She realized how much she had grown, how much strength she had discovered within herself, and how much the quiet rancher's patience and respect had shaped her recovery. Her heart was filled with gratitude, not only for her freedom, but also for the lessons she had learned about trust, resilience, and hope. The night before she planned to leave, the woman and the rancher sat on the porch together, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, red, and purple, reflecting the beauty of the land she had come to love. She turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "I will never forget what you have done for me. You have given me something no one else ever could: freedom, respect, and the chance to rebuild my life. I will carry that with me always." The rancher smiled gently, his eyes reflecting a mix of pride and sadness. "You've earned it," he said simply. "Your spirit was never meant to be chained. Go, live your life, and remember that you have the strength to face anything." His words were not just encouragement. They were a recognition of her courage, determination, and wisdom. She felt a lump in her throat, a mixture of emotion that was both bittersweet and inspiring. The following morning, the woman prepared to leave. She packed her supplies carefully, checking each item and making sure she had everything she might need. The rancher watched, his expression calm but full of understanding. When she was ready, he handed her a small bundle of essentials: food, a water pouch, and a few tools for survival. "Take these," he said. "They will help you on your journey, but remember, your true strength comes from within. Trust yourself." As she mounted her horse, she looked back at the ranch one last time. The house, the fields, the animals, and the quiet rancher who had changed her life forever, all of it would remain in her memory. She felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude, knowing that she was leaving a place of safety and comfort, but moving toward the life she had always longed for. She felt the wind on her face, the warmth of the sun on her skin, and the steady beat of her own heart, strong and unafraid. The journey ahead was not easy. The Apache woman traveled through rugged terrain, over hills and across rivers, and through forests and open plains. She relied on her skills, her instincts, and the lessons she had learned from the rancher. She recognized signs in the land, the tracks of animals, the direction of the wind, and the location of water sources that allowed her to navigate safely and efficiently. Each day, her confidence grew, and the fear that had once dominated her life began to fade. Along the way, she encountered moments of solitude and reflection. She thought about her people, her home, and the ancestors whose stories had been passed down to her. She remembered the lessons they had taught her about courage, survival, and respect for the land. She realized that, though many of her people were gone, their spirit lived on within her. Every step she took, every decision she made was a tribute to their memory. One afternoon, she stopped by a quiet river, its clear water sparkling in the sunlight. She knelt beside it, cupping the cool water in her hands and drinking deeply. As she rested, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with hope and purpose. She dreamed of finding other descendants of her people, of sharing the stories she had learned, and of living a life guided by the wisdom of her ancestors. She knew that the road would be difficult, but she also knew that she was no longer the frightened captive who had been sold at an auction. She was strong, skilled, and free. The journey also brought moments of challenge. Harsh weather, rough terrain, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead tested her determination. But each challenge reinforced her resilience. She remembered the quiet rancher's words: her true strength came from within. And indeed, every obstacle she overcame strengthened her confidence, sharpened her skills, and deepened her understanding of what freedom truly meant. Eventually, she began to see signs of human settlement, small villages and farms that dotted the distant valleys. She approached them carefully, observing from a distance before deciding whether it was safe to enter. When she finally met people from her own heritage, she felt a surge of emotion, relief, recognition, and joy. Though she had been alone for so long, she realized that she was not truly isolated. Her people, her traditions, and her stories were still alive, waiting for her to reconnect and carry them forward. The Apache woman continued her journey, meeting descendants of her people and sharing the knowledge she had preserved. She taught them the survival skills, stories, and wisdom she had learned, while also listening to their experiences. Each encounter reminded her of the strength and resilience of her people, and she felt a deep sense of pride in being a part of that continuing legacy. Through it all, she carried the memory of the rancher with her. His quiet patience, respect, and guidance had allowed her to reclaim her life and her spirit. She knew that she would never forget him or the lessons he had imparted. Though they were now separated by distance, his influence remained with her, shaping the choices she made and the strength she carried within herself. Finally, after many weeks of travel, the Apache woman stood on a hill overlooking a valley filled with signs of life and community. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, freedom, and hope. She had survived captivity, rebuilt her spirit, and found a path toward her people and her heritage. She understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that she had the skills, courage, and wisdom to face them. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with brilliant colors, the Apache woman allowed herself to smile. She had walked a long, difficult path, but she had arrived at a place of strength, connection, and purpose. She was free, not just in body but in mind and spirit. The journey she had begun as a captive sold at auction had become a story of resilience, courage, and hope. And though the world remained unpredictable, she knew that she would face it on her own terms, carrying with her the lessons of the rancher, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the strength of her own indomitable spirit. She took a deep breath, feeling the wind on her face and the warmth of the sun fading into the cool evening air. For the first time in her life, she felt completely and utterly free. And in that freedom, she knew that she had the power to shape her own destiny, honor her heritage, and live a life of courage, dignity, and hope.